Singularity.
My name is Nicola, and you're watching Singularity FM, the place where we interview the future. If you guys enjoy this podcast, you can help me make it better in two ways. Number one is you can go to iTunes and write a brief review, or number two is you can go to interviewthefuture.com and simply make a donation. Today, my guest on the show is Professor Francesca Ferrando. Francesca teaches philosophy at New York University, and she is a leading voice in the field of posthuman studies. Her latest book, which I just finished reading, is called Philosophical Posthumanism, and in my view, it is by far the best book that I have ever read on topics related to transhumanism, maybe posthumanism, even maybe humanism. I think everyone who is either calling themselves already a transhumanist or is considering, joining in one shape or one way or another the transhumanist community absolutely must read Francesca's book. I think it is, to me, quite honestly, it is shocking how ambitious it was in its scope. It goes further, wider, and deeper into a diversity of topics you would never expect that it would go. It does so very well, very eloquently. And, if there's any one downside of her book is the fact that book would require you to put some work. It would require you to be open-minded, and it will not give you everything digested and ready to go, but it would actually make you work to get the message and in all its richness, diversity, and complexity that Francesca has presented for us. So, without further ado, maybe I should just say, welcome to Singularity FM, Francesca. I'm already a fan of your book and of you, of course.
Nicola, thank you so much for your invitation, for your kind presentation, and thank you so much for your work. You've been a real pioneer in these topics of post-transhumanism, interviewing really interesting people who are working in these fields. So I'm also a big fan of your work, and I would like to thank you for your vision, for your work, and for your intellectual honesty. I like that you are rigorous, honest, that you are very clear, that you really want to get to the core of things. So I'm really would like to thank you for everything.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I've done my best. But that's another reason why I loved your book so much is because I've been doing research on this book. On my work even before I started my podcast and my website. So probably I started maybe since 2004 or so. And so that's like, let's say 16, 17 years. I was amazed how much I learned from your book, especially how much you were able to put in only maybe the core of the book was, I think, about 190 pages or so. And I think it had a tremendously rich and big bibliography and reference notes and things like that. So it's very rigorously researched academic book. But how densely you made it, it's kind of like Nietzschean in a way. Very rich, every paragraph you could ponder for a very long time. And that's why I said the book requires a lot of work from us, because I honestly had to reread paragraphs and pages multiple times. They're so profound. And I'm going to be rereading your book again. That's absolutely for sure.
But it's very interesting, Nicola, you said that, because that's precisely the scope of the book, and you got it completely. So it's almost like a puzzle where each piece is independent, so you don't need to put the whole puzzle together. Let's say that you're very interested in transhumanism. You can just follow, the navigational tool and just read about transhumanism, and you are not caught into reading everything else. Now, if you want to read everything, of course, is an interesting panoramic scenario of what's happening philosophically about what I call a posthuman paradigm shift, which are so many different movements. But also, like you said, if you're just interested in a topic, you can just really focus on that without going into everything else. And that's also was the scope of Nietzsche. He was very much into aphorism, and I love Nietzsche. He was one of the few philosophers who really changed my life. So, with Nietzsche, really, you can just read one part and that's it. It's not that you need everything else. Of course, you can read everything else, but I find so much inspiration out of his work. So I'm really, very honored by the fact that you mentioned his work, and I think that you completely got it right. Like it's very dense and it's very clear. And if people want to just read a part, I always tell everyone, you don't need to read everything. Of course you can, because it's based on question and answers, so you can keep going, but you don't have to. So that's, I think you got it completely right, the way the book is written.
Yes, but let me push back a little bit here, because I think one of the great strengths of your book here is precisely the fact that it would allow transhumanists to situate the idea of transhumanism, the community, both in the historical context, also in the philosophical context, in the ideological context, in the sort of like theological context, even, if you will, in the etymological context, even, in so many in the postmodernist context, which is very important, in the post-anthropocentric context, which is very important, in the post-dualistic context, which is very important. And I think you can't really get transhumanism if you're not having all those contexts at least somewhere in the background. And another thing which I was really impressed by, since I'm, a major fan of ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, you have very rich Greek, I don't know about Latin, but maybe Latin too, due to your background, which we will start talking about very soon. But very rich background in the etymology of both the Greek and the Latin of all the terms that we're using and we're going to be discussing today. Things like transhumanism, posthumanism, anthropocentrism, technology even, humanism even. You know how many books I've read on the topics of humanism, of transhumanism, and they never even touch on humanism. They never even ask the question, what is the human? They jump straight onto the transhuman, or they just touch it in a single sentence as if it's so dead obvious and we have nothing to consider anymore about it. And you go to extreme lengths. I was so impressed. You go to such a great length to discuss the importance of the origin and the meaning and the problems surrounding the meaning of being human as a foundation of anything that could later on be built upon that as a transhuman or posthuman or anything else like that. Like, see, I can rant about your book forever. I'm so impressed.
But I think you're very right about pointing this aspect of transhumanism, because I think that transhumanists are very good at having visions about the future. The problem that I see with the movement is that they don't really look at their own roots. So they don't really explore where they come from and what are the issues with the present and with the past. By not doing that, you are running the risk of bringing the same issues with different, dresses to the future. So that's one of my criticisms to transhumanism. It is that it's a plant with so many interesting flowers and fruit and foliage, but the roots of that are weak because they don't really explore. They think, oh, that's gone, let's move on. But time is not linear. And that's an issue with transhumanists. They think they can just, and I say that because I consider myself a posthumanist, and I'm going to go into this later on. But transhumanists really jumps to the future, thinking that, the past and the present are kind of, in this linear approach that you can just get rid of them and move on. But existence is not like that. Time is not linear. Time is a cycle, if you want, or it's a spiral, or, that we are, our present and our past and our future is already here. So there is no way we can think of the future without acknowledging the past and the present. And that's one, I do have a lot of respect for transhumanism, but that's a real thing. Like, you are building a whole movement with no roots. And the risk is that a big wave of new social awareness is going to,
That intellectual poverty actually has pushed me away from transhumanism in the last 3 or 4 years, because there's a very kind of a religious zealot wing in it. There's also a wing with, and generally I think very few people in the transhumanist community are sort of educated on the epistemological, intellectual, even metaphysical origins and lineage of the movement. And the danger is, and you gave a very good metaphor here with the fruits, but I want to put it in a different way, perhaps, to say that the danger is that the community, which may be very powerful in the future, may end up repeating many of the age-old mistakes, precisely because of this sort of poverty of awareness and education of the past historical, ideological, metaphysical, epistemological, even religious and theological. Many people don't even know about cosmism and Tsiolkovsky, and how all that had huge influence, like Russian Eastern Orthodox Christianity had a huge impact on transhumanism today. So they repeat the same sort of memes without ever being aware they're doing it, and without being aware of what the costs, the dangers, and the opportunities are of doing that. And your book is like, perfect nut-cracking machine. Derrida said that deconstruction is about finding juicy fat nuts and cracking them up. Well, congratulations, because your book honestly found the juicy nut of transhumanism and cracked it right up. And that's something you should be proud of, and cracked it up in a good way, so that if people actually put the work to go and read your book carefully and reread paragraphs and pages, like usually I do 170 pages in a few hours. I read your book for probably 2.5, 3 days, simply because I had to reread so many times. And if people invest that kind of time, I would claim it would be easy for them to discard the shells and get the juicy, nutty parts, which are all the goodness of transhumanism, without having, all breaking teeth and repeating mistake on the shells and all that stuff.
I think you're so right, Nicola. I think you're so right. And that's why I would like to say that I'm not against transhumanism. I think that transhumanism is an interesting vision. And I think that on so many levels, things are going to happen. For instance, radical life extension is already happening. If you look at the Romans, since you were mentioning the Romans used to die around 30, 40. And that age, 50, you were considered very, very old. Nowadays, someone who is 50 is considered middle-aged. So, we are already radically extending our life. So from here to go to 800 or 1,000 or whatever, like Aubrey de Grey, he doesn't go into limit. He said just unlimited lifespan. I think that that's absolutely possible, So I'm not saying that what transhumanism, because there are also other people who are really just against transhumanism, even within the posthuman movement. That's not me. I recognize a lot of visions and a lot of clarity that transhumanists have around the future. But I also see a lot of the weaknesses, and you are very, very correct on what you said. I think exactly what you said, I share it fully, that if we don't see the issues of the present and of the past, we are going to repeat them in a different shape. So for instance, maybe in the future, which we'll see, but even if we don't have some type of human discrimination, we are going to have other discriminations based on species, based on biological versus technological. So if we don't look at those big issues, we're going to repeat them over and over and over with different groups of people. And when I say people, I don't just mean humans, because people now, persons, is really expanding to comprehend non-human animals, technological beings, think of Sophia the robot. So really, persons in this sense of expanded way that is not just strictly biological or strictly human, but we need to look at the issues of our society in order to really embody and manifest a real paradigm shift, not something that is just changing, the outfits and the way, people look, but also how we exist. Because at the end of the day, that's, to me, is the most important question and is the most important goal of our life. How are we existing? What kind of life are we manifesting for us and for everyone around us? So very right. If we don't look at those, yes, transhumanism is going to happen in many ways, but the main issues are not going to be solved in any way.
Yeah, let's I jump right in just because of my enthusiasm and sort of like shocking, like I was literally shocked to know by your book. And I'm not the kind of guy who just dishes compliments to my guests, and I turned down many interviews because I didn't like their book. Others, I have said on the record that I'm not a big fan, and that because their book was immature or whatever. And I'm not putting a claim that that's the truth, objectively speaking. I'm just putting the claim that that's my opinion and that's my perception of what their work is. But I is just like I utterly love your book. I think honestly it's the best book on the and it's not really a transhumanist book, it's a posthumanist book, and yet it's the best transhumanist book. That's the paradox in it. So anyway, let's just zoom out here and slow down things a little bit and start from the beginning. Who is Francesca Ferrando?
I would say is someone who wants to be aware of herself. That's, from, I guess, day one in my life. Just want to be aware of who I am in whatever situation I am. If I am a child, which I was a child, things that people tell you, can you just accept them or not? And I remember being a child and, I had an interesting upbringing. I was raised in Italy, in an interesting city, Turin, where there are many different souls. And there is the Christian souls, there is the communist souls, there is the socialist souls, there is the fascist soul, there is all kinds of things. But especially, there is a big working history of people coming from the south to work at Fiat, which was the main industrial...
It's an industrial manufacturing center. Also.
And so there was all these aspects, but I remember being very young. And so my father didn't care about religion. My mother cared, they had different visions, but I would go just because it's, as an Italian, you would go to church. And I remember, being told, ask, who created us? And people would say God. And then you ask them, but who created God? And they would say, oh, no one created God. And I was a child and they would say, okay, but why no one created God and God created us? This is a child already thinking that doesn't really make sense to me. So I remember from a very young age, being really wanting to be aware of things, I guess in the more honest way I could. And also enjoying my existence because it's all we have. It's, now going to Hinduism, it's Lila, the big cosmic game. But it is a serious game because it's all we have. And if we forget it is a game, that's when things start to get really nauseating. And when we are lost in our jobs or in our idealism or in our missions, and we lose, perspective of the present. So I think, I am someone who, in whatever situation I am, which is constantly changing, I'm always trying to really understand who I am.
Very interesting. So you're a curious child. I was curious and subversive. So I was the kind of kid who wasn't so much interested in God, but in grade 1, I told all my classmates that there is no Santa. And that led to this big debate about, is there Santa or is there no Santa? And so my classmates who were arguing that there is Santa said, okay, let's ask the teacher. So we went to ask the teacher and the teacher said, well, ask your parents. And I was scandalized because to me, the teacher didn't do his job because he didn't say the truth, what I perceived was the truth, which of course is there is no Santa. And then on the next meeting with the parents, some parents complained that their kids were traumatized because of me telling them that there was no Santa and that that's all an invention of the adults. So I was like a lot more subversive.
And it's so interesting you're saying that because I am a mother also of a young child and she's 3. And now is when, all these, I call like social mythologies come into the picture and are, given directly to the child as if they should bring this, this thing and move it to the future. And I ask myself, do I want to give this to my child? And I think I don't because it's a lie. And children don't need that. Like I, for instance, I did not grow up with Santa. We grew up with like little Jesus. Other people grew up with like Saint Lucia. Other people grew up with like the little mouse bringing gifts. I mean, there are all kind of, social mythologies out there. But of course, the question is, can you really start an honest relationship with a young mind telling lies? And my answer is not. So, like we have different visions in my family. Some people think that is a nice, cute story to give, which I'm not against. But, when she asks me, I always say, I cannot say that is, okay. When she asks me, I say, it's whatever pretty much you believe. I mean, it's not that there is Santa or not. For me, I tell her there was no Santa because when I grew up, there was no Santa, But for you, there is Santa if you want to believe in Santa. So I think that in the end, the social mythology should be clarified as mythologies, should not be given as truth. because I think that you're already starting young minds to believe in lies, and then they go on all their life trying to dismantle this constant life that they're given. And I think it is really important to be brave enough to really look into yourself for every little actions that you do, not just what we write, but how we behave. How are we as citizens, as members of a bigger community, as parents, as sisters or brothers, or mothers or fathers or whatever. And then really ask what you should be doing. And I think that the way to go is not just what you're supposed to be doing, which for instance is, yes, Santa exists, but say what you really think that you should be doing as an honest person that wants things to be different. So I think that it's a good example that you bring, because I think that a post-transhumanist education should start from day one. And again, it's very interesting to be a mother, not only because it's an incredible experience, but because you realize how much we already push into beings that are not even here yet. Because when she was already in the belly, she would get all these gifts that were supposed to be for a girl. And it's ridiculous, because a girl or a boy, it's not that they think differently. They are different beings, like everyone is different. And I think that it's very interesting how our society really pushes from not even day one, but before day one of someone existing, social mythologies that then are really hard to dismantle, and then that people take as final truth. So I think that an honest post or transhumanist should be always query themselves, should be always ask themselves, is that fine? Is that okay? Is this something that I want to bring not only to the future, but to the present, and be able to say no, with kindness and with joy, not with anger. Because, society is also a lot of fun, and society is also taking care of us in many ways. But yes, we are part of it, and we can change it. So it's not that everything that is given is something that we should just take. There is an interesting story of the Buddha with this person going to him with so much anger. And he said, if someone comes to you with a gift which is full of garbage, should you accept it? And this person said, no. Okay, so just take your anger and go away, because that's not a gift that I want. So it's not that any gift you should just accept. If someone come and give you, as a gift, garbage from the nuclear station, you say, thank you so much, but I don't want this. You can keep it for yourself. So I think the same goes with society. Of course, it's important to be grateful and to be respectful and honoring others and their own beliefs, but it's also very important to honor your own intellectual vision, your own existential honesty, and your own message to humanity and post-humanities, because I think that we're not just human. We are in a planet. We are the planet, in connection with plants and robots and non-human animals, biosphere, etc., etc.
Yeah, and another reason why I love your work and who you are so much is that, after I read your book, I watched a bunch of your interviews, and you live your message. And what you just told me about your daughter is a perfect example of the praxis that you finish your book with, of what you call posthumanist agency, which we're going to probably talk about towards the end of our conversation. So already with your 3-year-old daughter, you're kind of setting up sort of that kind of posthumanist agency. Okay, mommy, you can choose whether you want to believe there is Santa. So mommy has decided there is no Santa for mommy, but you can decide if there is Santa or there isn't Santa for you. So you're already kind of putting that idea of the agency there, which is like really commendable, and that's why you're talking about the posthumanist praxis. But let me go back again here and ask you. So, okay, so you're this very curious child. Where did and how did philosophy come into your life?
So I was lucky enough to be studying philosophy at a very young age, because I was in Italy, and the educational system is excellent. And in my high school, I decided to study classical studies. So I started to study philosophy when I was 14-year-old, and when I was 13-year-old.
That's why you're so good at the ancient Greek and the Latin stuff.
Yeah, so I studied 5 years of ancient Latin and ancient Greek between age 13 and 18. So yeah, those 5 years, yeah. And that's something that it's a real existential a gift for me. I'm not saying that everyone should study that.
It's a foundation for everything, in my view. Like it's so good. You can do science, physics, chemistry, philosophy, literature, anything almost. With that foundation, you can do anything.
Yeah, I think that is an excellent foundation. Of course, you know, there are other foundations. You can study Sanskrit or ancient Chinese, but someone based in Italy that was based on whatever you call is a Western canon, for me studying, and to be sincere, and these are the time people didn't like that, but I loved ancient Greek. And ancient Latin, I was not too much of a big fan. I also come from the North, which was also a history of invasion. So Rome invaded the North. But apart from that, I love the Greeks. And as an Italian, you're supposed to love the Romans. So, I mean, they were all good. And also now, of course, you know, Roman literature is wonderful as well. But let's say the Greek literature and philosophy and the tragedy and, you know, and the mythology, it's such an impact on me, I got so fascinated with, especially mythology. Mythology really, it's almost like a fable, but done in a very interesting way. Of course, now with the eye of a much more, you know, mature person, I see also that Greek mythology come from patriarchy. You know, it's not just mythology, come from specific viewpoints, but still as a child, these Medusas and these beings that were half human, half not human, that were living in the sea and in the sky, and it was so fascinating. So I loved mythology, and I loved, of course, being able to translate. So we would translate ancient texts, you know, like Plato and Homer and all these things. So that was incredible. That was really, really a great gift. And that's also when I studied very young philosophy, including Nietzsche. And Nietzsche had a real impact in my life. So literally, you know, I remember Nietzsche studied because he was contemporary when I was 17-year-old or 16, because we started in a linear way, you know, from the ancient Greek philosophy. We did not study Indian or Chinese, but we started with ancient Greek philosophy, you know, and passing all through the Western canon until contemporary. And I remember when I studied Nietzsche to me was someone who gave me tool to exist. And I remember, you know, the notion of the eternal recurrence, and I took it as a real tool for my life. So if I was going to live this life again, over and over again, the same, everything exactly the same, would I say yes? Would I say yes to this moment? Or would I say yes to what I did yesterday and tomorrow? And being so young, I was 16, and having that tool, it helped me so much in my life. And I remember telling other people about Nietzsche, and, you know, people who were older in Italy and didn't really have so much time, or didn't choose so much in their life, and they were horrified. It's like, oh my God, that's a terrible idea of your life coming back over and over the same. Of course, it's just an intellectual thought. Some people say that he really believed that, but that's not the point. The point is that as a thought for you to decide in your life what you want to do, if your life was going to come over and over exactly the same. So it's your final work of art, it's your existential work of art. It's so powerful. And I was really lucky to study when I was 16. So I really spent the rest of my life asking me the question. So, you know, every time I'm not sure, I said, would I relive these over and over again? And if the answer is not, that might be something I don't need to do, you know? But if the answer is yes, then it's something that I need to do. So yeah, Nietzsche had a huge impact. So I was really, really honored that you kind of caught that in my text, because he had, I think as a philosopher, he was the one who had more of an influence in me. But, you know, as philosophical trends, you know, feminism, posthumanism, you know, there are other isms that had an influence. But as a single philosopher, Nietzsche was the one that was like, boom, it was like a bomb in my life.
Yeah, and he was also a classic scholar. So you share that with him too. And me and you, we share our love. And, you know, when I was growing up as a kid, the first books that I read when I was, you know, 6 and 7 years old were the ancient Greek myths and legends. So I wasn't reading fairy tales and, you know, princesses and princes and you know, the evil witch and that kind of stuff. I mean, my mom was reading that stuff to me, but I was reading ancient Greeks myths and legends, and, you know, Theseus and Perseus and Medusa and Zeus did this and all that. This is what I read and reread, you know, so many times, and Hercules and his feats and all that stuff, Jason and the Argonauts. Like, so we share that. But let's shift, as I told you, I think I can talk to you for so many hours, but I know our time is limited here. So let's shift our attention to your book, because it's so rich in material for proper discourse that I'm going to have to invite you in another 6 months or something back again to fill in the gaps that we would inevitably have to leave today, or build upon the foundation that we set up today. So first of all, your book is called Philosophical Posthumanism. So let's start with that term. What is posthumanism, first of all, and why philosophical? Why not just posthumanism?
Thank you so much, Nicola. So, can I take a step back before we go into that?
Of course.
So I call this era the posthuman era because it is an era in which many people coming from many different disciplines, and in this you're great. You've been interviewing scientists and people coming from theoretical physics and philosophers and cyberneticists. I mean, you are the example of that. In order to really understand the posthuman, it has to be interdisciplinary. So, but all these people are really asking one question, which is, what is the human? And all of them are agreeing that in the 21st century, the human can no longer be described as something static, as something clear, as something closed, but as, going back to Nietzsche would say, as a bridge, something open that is constantly evolving in many different ways for many different reasons. So in this sense, we have a real movement in philosophy, which I call it to be comprehensive posthuman. Now, in this movement, there are many different voices, to the point that some voices are almost saying things that almost contradict each other. But that's the beauty of that, because it's happening. And I always bring the example, for instance, of humanism, Renaissance humanism, which obviously at the time was not called humanism, and humanism as a term came later on. And there were so many different voices, and they did not agree with each other at all. But now we study humanism as a movement. And if you see a movement as the ocean, in which there are many different waves and different beings, and of course, but if you think of a movement as something unique and static, and that everyone agrees, that's not what we're talking about here. So when we're thinking of this era as the posthuman era, it's very exciting because we are doing something that it's happening. So it's not just studying Nietzsche, who, as great as he was, he died. And it's not just about studying the Greeks, who, as great as they were, they are gone. But it's really being honest and being respectful to our own manifestation, because we live in a specific time frame, which is, of course, if you go into the canon that we're using, 21st century, planet Earth, and the planet itself is different. We are different. We are living a different kind of life. The planet is different. There are less trees. There is all kinds of things that are different from the ancient Greeks or from the ancient Hindus, etc., etc. So us, to be fully aware of who we are, we need to ask the question, who are we right now in the 21st century, in this spatio-temporal manifestation? So when we ask this question, of course, the answer is not just copy and paste what other people said before us. And of course, the answer is different because we are all different. We come from different experiences, different location in life, different backgrounds, etc., etc. And that's also, of course, is manifested in the movement itself. So in the movement, you have many different schools of thoughts that are also not one but many. For instance, you have transhumanism, which is not one but many. That's why I always add the S, transhumanisms. And you have liberal transhumanism, democratic transhumanism, extropianism, the singularity. You have so much there. And then you also have posthumanism, which is also not one but many. So posthumanism, of course, the term itself comes from Hassan, 1970, but more as a current, as a school of thought, started back in the 90s. And at the time was what would now we define as critical cultural posthumanism, which was based on cultural studies, critical studies, literature. And it was also a response to transhumanism and saying, okay, there are many limitations there. You're not bringing to the conversation all these other issues. For instance, wonderful work by Catherine Hayes, How We Became Posthuman, in which she really brings to the attention the point of embodiment. Because she's saying, the way transhumanists are going about existence is in the traditional dualistic way of Western thought, in which you can separate the body and the mind and just choose one or the other. Usually in the Western canon, you would choose the mind because the body would consider the less, the dirty, etc., etc. And so she's bringing this issue in the conversation that we are always embodied. So of course, now going through some of the points that were already brought along by the critical and cultural posthumanism, philosophical posthumanism really developed a philosophical discussion about this and a philosophical inquiry. And so kind of expand the map to the whole rich heritage of philosophy. In that sense, posthumanism locates itself out of the development of postmodernism. And this is very different for transhumanism. In fact, a lot of transhumanists not only don't really acknowledge postmodernism, but they never studied that because they come from Anglo-Saxon traditions, specifically analytic tradition, England, United States, where postmodernism has not really reached yet. It's coming, but it's not there yet.
Or some transhumanists like Natasha Vita-More and Max are openly hostile towards posthumanism, postmodernism. Yes. I mean, towards postmodernism.
Yes, but it's also true that, and I love both of their works, they're excellent minds, but it's also true that they were not trained about this. And I was in an event with Natasha recently, and she was explaining how difficult and hard are the postmodern concepts. And she's right, because when I started to study postmodernism, it didn't really stick with me. It took me years to really understand the language, to really be part of it. I remember, as a 19-year-old saying, why aren't these people talking in a way that you can understand it? And I remember, for instance, liking more like the 70s, Marxism and feminism of, the second wave, because it was so much clearer. So it took me years. But of course, after you really you have to be very patient with postmodernism. But after you do that, it's so enriching. And after you understand, there is no way you can go back. It's almost after you have that realization, there is no way you can just, we can get rid of that. You cannot.
To me, postmodernism is kind of like the quantum mechanics of the humanities, if you will. If you think you understand it, you probably don't. But the very hardness and kind of trickiness and weirdness and strangeness of it is not and should definitely not be a reason for one to dismiss it. And I'm afraid that Natasha and others are a good example of people who have dismissed it. And I hope she's gone beyond that point now. I'm not sure she has, but I hope she has. But people who have dismissed it in the past simply because they haven't, gotten quite, to understand it, or they haven't invested the time necessary and the effort necessary to educate oneself about it and to learn from it and to see. And as you just said, once you go through that sort of huge initial barrier of time invested, effort invested, you can't go back. It's like quantum mechanics. Everything changes, the whole paradigm shifts, and you never can go back to Newtonian physics. It's impossible.
Precisely. Yeah, it's so deep, and there are so many different voices. So that's out of that kind of flourishing of ideas, we have posthumanism. And it's almost like I always say, posthumanism is not going beyond postmodernism, but also kind of like developing further some of the ideas that were already there in the postmodern tradition. So, of course, once you start deconstructing the human, the point is that some in the postmodern tradition, because it was all new, kind of stay with the humans. There are some exceptions here, like Foucault, for instance, but he talks about the death of man, which in the post-human tradition, I would really go beyond the dualism of life and death, and as I explain in the book. But in general, a lot of them stayed within the human frame. So the post-human keep with the deconstructing the notion of the human itself, and showing that in many traditions, the human has been placed in a dualistic, dichotomic, symbolic location in separation from non-human others, especially non-human animals. But now you can add robots and algorithms and avatars, etc., etc. So that's when posthumanism really relates to postmodernism. For instance, Deleuze seeing existence more as a rhizome, more as a big network, and of course also Latour, who is more contemporary, or of network or a rhizome of elements that connect in not in linear ways, in ways that can be chaotic, but as Nietzsche said, out of the chaos, the dancing star is born. So the chaos that brings existence, that brings the manifestation. So that's why it's really hard to just go from a linear way. Okay, we dismiss the past, we dismiss the present, we just jump into the future. There is no such thing, because everything is interconnected in ways that sometimes are not even very easy to see the connection, but everything is related. I play a game with my daughter sometimes to try to find words that are not related, and it's pretty much impossible. So you can relate any kind of words. For instance, I don't know, bridge and book, and there is a truck bringing books. So there is always a way to bring a bridge, a connection. But it's really hard to find words, for instance, that are not connected, or notions that are not connected. And that's, for me, is existence, because everything is related in some ways or others. And of course, this also goes to us as a species. So that's when we really need to think of us interconnected as a species in post-dichotomic ways. And of course, beyond the species as a planet. Because at the end of the day, we are not just living on this planet. We are this planet. We are this planet. I like Alan Watts as a metaphor. He was a Zen Western philosopher. And he says, think of a tree and the apples. And now think of the human. And the human is also like an apple that is created by the planet. And I think that's very revealing, because often we just think of us living on this planet. But it's to the point that ecology, oikos from Greeks, oikos means house. But we are not just living in this house. The house is us, and we are the house. And we eat out of the house. We breathe the air of the house. And also, if the situation around us gets polluted, we become sick. The rise of cancer in the 21st century is very clear. We are living in polluted areas, and that's also, it's manifesting in our bodies. So I like this idea of not just living somewhere. We are this planet, and we may become other planets. If we move to Mars, some people eventually are going to adapt there, and generation after generation, they are going to look different, and they're going to evolve in different way, and they're going to be part of Mars, because now they will be able to live in Mars without external technologies, which is not obviously the case now. That's why we're sending Mars rovers, and there are no humans living there. But yeah, so that's the interconnecting aspect of existence. It was really so well clarified by postmodernism.
And that's why you start your book with defining all those isms, which we're going to have to go through to lay down the foundation. But yet you finish your book with sort of like the multiverse, right? So, which again is highly unexpected, and yet you do that very well. And it makes perfect sense when you explain why you do that. Okay, so let's go through the other isms here. And by the way, I'm a big Alan Watts fan, and I think when he was talking about this, he was saying something like, the universe is the kind of universe that peoples. So it's not like we just have people in the universe, but actually the universe is the kind of universe that peoples, where people is a verb, because it's a universe which produces people, which we are. That's the kind of universe, just like the acorn produces the oak tree, and that's in the nature of the acorn to become the tree. And each one of those is perfect. And likewise, the universe that we live in apparently is a peopling kind of universe, because it has peopled us, the people in it. So anyway, I love Alan Watts. Let's go back here and lay down the foundation for a few other of the isms. So we kind of touched a little bit on posthumanism, and I'm sure we're going to be coming back to it many times, but let's lay down and differentiate between posthumanism and humanism and transhumanism.
Excellent. So I would say, maybe let me start by differentiating post and transhumanism, and then we add humanism as a layer. So that's very important. And that was my goal at the beginning of my career, because when I started to work on these topics, I realized that there was so much confusion between post and transhumanism. So let's say some people were, really against transhumanism, but they were calling it posthumanism. Fukuyama is a great example of that. In his book, Our Posthuman Future, he is talking about transhumanism, but he's really talking about, but he used the term posthumanism. So there was so much confusion about these terms.
Francis Fukuyama is the intellectual that I love to hate on my podcast. I hate his intellectual work ever since he came up with the end of history idiocy, which then produced offshoot ideas like the McDonald's theory of peace. Because I came into sort of transhumanism and the singularity from the sort of armed conflict wing from political science. And back in the day, in the 90s, there was the clash of civilization from Samuel Huntington was big at that time in the 90s. Before that, in the early 90s was Francis Fukuyama's end of history thesis. And then his views on transhumanism are so terribly confused. And the posthuman example where he's actually talking about transhumanism, but he's using the term posthuman, is a perfect example of that. So I cannot be impartial when it comes to him. I just love to hate him. It's terrible. I admit my bias straight up here, but sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, Nicola, you have a lot of company in this because, for instance, I know that also in the posthumanist community, there is a lot of, disappointment towards Francis Fukuyama, because someone who eventually got a bestseller, because Our Posthuman Future became a bestseller, and he brought a lot of misunderstanding about, the field. So a lot of people don't even want to hear, about him. I understand that he, as a scholar, should have done more work. If you're writing a book about something, you should study a little more. But I also see that he has some interesting points that he developed later on about agency, and especially about the idea that when you're talking about biotechnologies, you're really not talking about individual choices, but social choices. And I like when he says, there is an interesting interview where there is Francis Fukuyama and Anders Sandberg, and they are at Aarhus University during a beautiful conference. Aarhus University is a great center of studies on post and transhumanism. And the professor asked, okay, so I made this pill yesterday, and it's going to bring, I think, you like an enhanced life and more, and a radical life extension. And there are just limited life effects. Would you take it? And Sandberg said, yeah, I just want to know a little more about the side effects. But Fukuyama says, and I love, he looked at the professor and says, it's not so much about if I would take it, but if in a close future, people would force to take it because everyone around them is taking it. And I think he's making a very good point. When we are talking about these kind of biotechnological enhancements, we are not just talking about individual choices, which is one of the main core aspects of transhumanism. Say, oh, this is just about you, about me. It is based on individual choices. It's never going to be forced on anyone. But society doesn't work like that. Because all of a sudden, if everyone is taking it, and everyone is taking, and I teach these topics with my students at NYU, and they often say, listen, I would not take it. But if everyone around me is taking it, and they are getting all A's, and they don't even have to study, or they have to study one day, and I'm getting my A- and I study for 1 month, eventually I will have to take it, because after, we finish our university degree, I will not get a job, and they will get a job. So it is very interesting that when we are talking about these developments, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't develop that. Yeah, of course, that's a whole other issue. It's not that it means that we should go against it, but we should be aware that we are not talking about just individual choices. And the same goes for genetic engineering, because if I get my children, the designer babies, their DNA become part of the genetic pool of humans. And that's not just their genetic heritage. It becomes everyone's genetic heritage. And they may decide to, travel somewhere when they're older and they fall in love with someone in their country and they have children. We are talking about a species. We are not talking just about individual choices or national choices. So I think that Fukuyama, with all his limitations, I think that he has very good points. So that's why in my case, I still sometimes, when I have organized so many conferences, and sometimes I mention, should we invite Francis Fukuyama as a keynote? And I get so much anger. No, are you kidding me? And like, come on. It's also interesting to have him as one of the voices, but usually it's really put down in favor of other voices. But I must say that if I can in the future, I would like to have him in a dialogue, because I think that he has very good points. Although, again, I totally recognize that as an academic who has such a big impact and, a lot of followers, when you write a book, you need to do your own work. And apparently in that book, he did not.
But that you see, a broken clock shows the time right twice a day. And I don't care how popular you are, how many best-selling books you have, and how big your following is, if you're producing garbage like the end of history. Okay, that's like the stupidest thing I've ever heard. The end of history. Okay, the Soviet Union collapsed. We are the winners. Capitalism won. It's not only the best story that has ever been told, it's the best story that can ever be told. And as long as we sustain the capitalist system, everything else would be fine around it. But that's the end of the history, because it cannot ever be perfected any more than we have ever perfected it, you see. And then, of course, someone would make the stupid even stupider by saying, look, the McDonald's theory of peace, two countries who have McDonald's never been to war before. How brilliant is this whole concept, right? So, but I mean, so you do bear responsibility for things like that. And took him 20 years to recognize that, as he put it, it was like a and he didn't even call it mistaken. He called it misplaced or something like that. So he didn't even quite fully recognize his mistake, even though eventually he kind of admitted to it. But you, in my books, you do bear a responsibility. You have to live your message. You are responsible for what you put out there. And if it's garbage, you're responsible for garbage. If it does more damage than good, you're responsible for that. On the other hand, I am open to conversation, and I would have pushed him, and I even asked him many years ago, I asked him to come to my podcast, but he turned me down. Which, you know, that's okay. That's his right to do so. But if he had come, I would have said to him the same things that I'm saying to you right now, because, you know, this is like an open sort of a Socratic type of a dialogue that we have to have. And, you know, if the power of his ideas overwhelms me, then I'll be willing to change my mind, you know. So, but until that moment happens, we are where we are. Anyway, let's move beyond Fukuyama.
Yeah, just say one more thing about Francis Fukuyama. I also think that it is valuable, though, that someone is able to look back and say, you know what, I was not correct. And then he did it a lot, even politically speaking. You know, he looked back at his career and said, okay, I don't support that anymore. And that's, unfortunately, it's not as common. When people get, you know, recognized, they just, their ego become, you know, the force of driving their existence. And I see that with Francis Fukuyama, that's different. I think that he looks back and he's able to say, okay, that was a mistake, that was not correct, that was this. I mean, he does that. So, you know, I do see that he is an interesting intellectual. And I also think that maybe, you know, once he realized all the different layers of post and transhumanism, the book would have been different. But the point about, you know, looking at these biotechnological developments, not just something individual, but such, I think that's a really, really important point, and we should all take that into consideration.
Sure, but it's not his point, and it's not an original point. That point's been brought many times before him and after him in much better ways. It's just that he got the spotlight because his book was a bestseller for a number of other reasons. I mean, even before that, the end of history thesis was a bestseller in the academic community of the late 80s, early 90s in the political science departments around the world, right? I never accepted it myself from then day one. To me, as coming someone from the Eastern Bloc, you know, growing up behind the Iron Curtain and sort of being exposed to all those ideas and sort of like very, which is kind of, you know, my partial and skewed opinion is, but I've been sort of like educated in the richness of history. Someone who comes along and says the end of history to me is kind of like, I'm predisposed to be very skeptical towards that kind of claim from the outset. But that was a popular idea, maybe one of the most dominant idea in the early 19th in the political science departments. And that to me is sad. Yeah, and it says a lot about the community, by the way, not in a good way.
Yeah, and it's also, you know, I think it's great that you, as a young mind, were able to say, you know, I don't buy these, I don't take these, I don't believe in these. And that's, I think, that's the most important thing we can do as educators, which I also think what you do is educating your community. It doesn't mean that if an idea is widely recognized, that is good, not at all. Although I would like to say that on some level, and this is not based on Fukuyama, but the idea of the end of history, to me, resonates in only one way, that history is a construction. And it starts with, it's very political, the beginning of history, which is writing. And it starts with a specific symbolic paradigm, which is a symbolic paradigm that doesn't go with the Paleolithic and Neolithic ideas. For instance, I'm very fascinated by ancient history. And I think that, all the prehistory should not be considered prehistory. The only reason why it's considered prehistory because it doesn't go with, specific social understanding of existence, including a paradigm shift based on patriarchy, because 90% of the figurines that we have in the Paleolithic and Neolithic time are figurines that are female. And Maria Gimbutas did a wonderful work on this. So there is some twist on the end of history, which I think that we should recognize that the way we study history, it's a very political construction, and that we should really revise completely the idea of history and would give us all a much more comprehensive idea of the human. Because we start history with Mesopotamia, which the whole paradigm shift has already happened. And we don't even study the first mythology, which is Inanna. The Descents of Inanna is the first written mythology that we have. We don't study that because it talks about the heroine, female, that is a goddess, and it is the Trinity, triple goddess. We don't study that. We start with Gilgamesh, which is the first male hero. So for me, when I realized, later on in my life, after being really curious about existence and delving, what a construction is not only society, but also education, I realized that one of the important things that I can do in my life in really bringing this aspect to the conversation. So maybe for me, the end of history, giving a completely different twist to Fukuyama, is the end of this political conception of history and really trying to see where we come from, really from the very ancient time of evolution. And that's for me very, very interesting. So when I teach ancient philosophy, I start with the hominids and the tools that they were using, because it defines us as technological beings, and this is going to Heidegger, but it's also going to paleontology. Because according to paleontology, we are those animals that use tools out of tools. There are some other primates that do that, but we really expanded on that notion. So when we bring technology to such an ontological importance, then we realize that history is a construction and that we really need to readdress the whole notion and not starting with ancient Mesopotamia, as much as great Mesopotamia was. And if we did, at least we should start a little earlier with the Sumerian. But we always usually start, with a specific concept of existence that go with our schemata right now, which is short window of history. If you look at a big clock of history, the Paleolithic time is the major aspect. It's like 90% of our history is humans, and we don't even consider that. So I think that it is the end of history in that sense, but unfortunately that's not what he meant. But that's what I mean, and I think yes, we should really reconsider everything that we study, because it gives us such a more comprehensive notion of the human and much less dichotomic. If we start teaching young minds that you are the best because you are female or male or white or black, you are already bringing shadows in their minds. Why are we doing this? Because we don't even realize that we have those shadows in our own minds. So that's when, to be a really honest post or transhumanist that is really reconceiving existence, is looking at everything and being able to say, no, I don't need to bring this social disease to the future. I don't need to do that. But if we don't do it, then the social diseases keep going on. And there are, diseases are not only biological, they're also cultural and social.
Yeah, and we carry those histories that you're talking about in all kinds of suspected and unsuspected ways. So, for example, recently 23andMe sent me this message saying, "Oh, Nicola, you have more Neanderthal genes than 83% of our other clients." And my wife was like, "Yeah, right. How is that news to anyone? We know that you're a Neanderthal." And I'm like, yeah, all the philosophy and the intellectual and the academic and all that is just smoke and mirrors. Deep down, I'm just like a wild Neanderthal. That's about it. Right? So.
But it's also very interesting how, the Neanderthals were portrayed in the history of humanity, because for many, many years, they were portrayed as the less, the brutal, the ignorant, the one who, to the point that we had at one point a theory which humans kill them all, which is horrible. Anyway, like it just put Homo sapiens in a very bad shape, in a very bad position. But now they're really reconsidering everything. So the Homo sapiens not only interbreed with the Neanderthals, but with Homo florensis, with so many other hominids. And also the Neanderthals, they were not that ignorant. They made even music. Now they found some flutes apparently they were using. They had, burial ceremonies. They were very similar to humans. And like you said, many of us carry Neanderthals genes. At least probably all people coming from Europe, Asia, a little less in Africa, because there was less Neanderthals, were able to go back. But the point is that, that's when we're talking about the rhizome. It's so hard to just say, okay, those are the Neanderthals and this is us. The Neanderthals is us. It's part of us. They never got extinct because part of their DNA is us right now. So that's when it's really, for me, very, how to say, immature to just say, okay, let's just jump to the future. There is no future. The future is here. And the past is here. And the present is here in the moment. So that's very interesting you're saying.
Yeah, and the Neanderthal is like the host of this podcast now for the last 11 years. But let me bring another false dichotomy or false distinction here. One which, by the way, Kim Stanley Robinson talks about in a most eloquent way that I've seen so far. And that's the false distinction between human and transhuman. And you kind of already touched right upon that by saying that since our birth, or at least the birth of humanity, is kind of characterized by us being the species that use tools made of other tools and stuff like that. And so therefore, and that's how many people define what transhuman is in a way. And that's why it seems that this kind of dichotomy or distinction is a false distinction between human and transhuman, and many people, such as Ramez Naam, who is a great science fiction author, and he wrote a book before that called More Than Human. He never used the term transhuman once in his book. And when I asked him why not, he said, well, I think we've been what people perceive to be transhuman. I think we've been that, but we only call it human that because we've been doing that since day one. So the question now is, how can we be more than human if that's a possibility, and how is that a possibility and all that stuff? But that distinction between transhuman and human is a false distinction. So can you, and that's kind of an invitation to go back and sort of, again, lay down the differences between posthumanism, transhumanism, and humanism, if we can.
Of course. So we talked a lot about posthumanism. When we talk about transhumanism, we talk about a very different genealogy, which is it's also interesting how it is constructed, because there are many voices that could be brought along in the discussion. But transhumanism itself as a movement really focuses on a specific lineage, which is usually based on Julian Huxley, who was the brother of Aldous Huxley, who was the writer of Our Brave New World. And Julian was a biologist. And he wrote a chapter of New Bottle for New Wine, in which the chapter itself is called Transhumanism, 1959. And in this chapter, he talks about how we now are in charge of evolution. Interesting enough, the DNA was just about at the time kind of being discovered. So he was not even really referring to that, but kind of really as a visionary as he was, kind of foreseeing the possibility of human really taking charge of evolution.
He was big on eugenics.
Exactly, for sure. Although, to be fair, after the whole Nazi Holocaust in Germany, he actually dropped the term, as everyone did at the time. But before that, he was one of the main voices.
And after his older brother poked fun at him with his book, Brave New World, of course, because this is what brothers do, right?
That's right. So now, there are a couple of things to say here. First of all is that the term transhumanism is to be found first in other writers, including Dante, which is back to the Middle Ages, in which he talks about the human being in the presence of God and being transhumanizing, but also more close to Julian Huxley with Teilhard de Chardin, because the term itself was, let's say, coined as a transhumanism by Teilhard de Chardin, who was a very good friend of Julian Huxley. In fact, Julian Huxley wrote the preface for the book in which actually Teilhard de Chardin wrote about the term transhumanism. And so there is definitely a connection. Now, the reason why Teilhard de Chardin is not really mentioned in the transhumanist movement is because he was a Jesuit. He was a Christian. And at the beginning, at least, the transhumanist movement was really trying to underline an atheistic approach that was not based on religion, that was kind of going beyond the religious paradigm. Now it's different. There are, religious approaches like Mormon transhumanism and other elements that are connecting, transhumanists to different religions. But at least in the 90s, the idea was, okay, we don't need God anymore. We, on some level, Nietzschean, Max More like Nietzsche, Bostrom dismiss Nietzsche, Max More does not. But the idea is that now we are the divine beings that we can and we want to be. And in that sense, we have a lot of power because now we have access to all these techniques of evolution, including, for instance, genetic engineering. So when we look at the genealogy of transhumanism, I always clarify that this is what transhumanism have created as the genealogy, but that's normal. Every movement create their own roots, and there are many people you can mention within the postmodern approach, and a lot of posthumanists like to really refer, for instance, to Deleuze, to Derrida. So of course, every movement bring their own roots and clarify, who you really want to be acknowledged as your ancestors, and so does transhumanism. So who is considered the father of the term transhumanism, which is actually not accurate, but it has been embraced by the transhumanist movement, is Julian Huxley, who was an interesting thinker, but as you said, for instance, was not such a visionary of the present, although he was of the future, by not seeing the real risks with a eugenic society. In fact, he was supporting the eugenic movement until World War II, the end of World War II, with all the with Nazis and the Holocaust, and then he never used the term again. He never supported again. To be fair to him, but he was also very much anthropocentric. In fact, if you read this chapter, which is transhumanism, he really says now we are. Actually, he doesn't say we as a species. Some of us who are aware of these shifts. So he's not even talking about the whole human species, but he says some of us who are aware of these,
the chosen few are the directors of evolution. And also I should say that he used all the masculine terms, although 1959 we can excuse him because a different type of approach came mostly in the 70s with clearly, gender neutral language should be used. Now, this is 1959. But anyway, he always referred to man, not as humanity, as instead of humanity, it's always man. And he always has his and, masculine terms. But anyway, apart from that, he's talking about a few who are aware of this shift, who wants to go beyond the limits of the human. And he's also very interesting because that's something not that transhumanists underline. No, he underlined a very spiritual aspect of the human, which is not really underlined so much by the transhumanists who always like to see him as a biologist. But he was a big fan also of Teilhard de Chardin, and he was also a very spiritual man. And in the chapter, towards the end, he really talking about human really being the best they can be, spiritually speaking. So it's very interesting that aspect, the spiritual aspect, is not so much underlined when when transhumanists talk about Julian Huxley. But anyway, going to the first part of the chapter is very short. It's 2 pages. So anyone here who's watching the podcast, you can read it. It's very easy to understand. It's very linear. It's an interesting chapter. It's a visionary chapter with its own limitation. And one of the limitations is anthropocentrism. In fact, he really talks about the human as the director of evolution, to the point that other philosophers are going to push this idea later on, like for instance, David Pearce, with the idea of paradise engineering. So David Pearce, who is a transhumanist philosopher, says, hedonistic imperative.
Yeah, and he said we should build paradise for everyone. To the point he said, I would not like to be a gazelle eaten by a lion, so we should re-engineer all animals, also non-human animals, also wild animals, which for me is a complete anthropocentric idea of us knowing what is right or wrong for everyone around us, which is also a colonialistic approach that goes beyond the human. So like colonialism was based on the idea that some humans knew better than other humans. So you have, for instance, the English going to India trying to make British all the Hindus, And that's the same idea of us trying to humanize every other species because we know what is better for everyone.
The white man's burden becomes the transhumanist's burden. I think that kind of anthropocentric neo-colonialist how should we say it, a proto-scientific or proto-technological kind of approach that David is suggesting in the in the hedonistic imperative, you give to it the best possible critique, and not even directly or as an intention perhaps, but at least indirectly. I read it as one of the best possible critiques of his proposal that I have come across, the best possible critique that I have come across. And that's why right now I kind of translated this in my mind with your help and prodding, that it's like the white man's burden to sort of save the savages from their savagery has now grown to become, the transhumanists' burden to remove all suffering from the cosmos. It sounds very noble and very wise and very generous and very unselfish, but actually if you start slicing it deep, you're going to find all the opposite motivation: self-serving, self-aggrandizing, arrogant, hubristic, all of those previous issues that came with colonialism and, the white man's ideas reemerging right here. And that's why I say it's so important to read your book. So it's kind of probably the best way to say it is that it's not a transhumanist book. It's the best non-transhumanist book for transhumanists. How about that?
That's awesome. I should quote you in the next edition. I like your definition.
Sure. I say it's the best. Philosophical Posthumanism is the best non-transhumanism. Okay, let me say it again. Philosophical Posthumanism is the best okay. I'll say it again, and this time would be better. So, philosophical Posthumanism is the best non-transhumanist book for transhumanists and non-transhumanists alike. Period.
Awesome. I'm going to make a clip of these and put it on my website. I love it. And I love also the whole time that you were trying to really find the right word. So the whole clip is like everything. It's not just the final, cut that is perfect. Everything is rather going to your brain and going through all the elements, which is existence. It's not just one clear shot. It's just all the elements that go into existing and constant queries, and that's perfect. That's awesome.
But that's why postmodernism is so hard, because there's so many things you have to consider. It's not linear, it's diverse, it's not hierarchical, it's sort of horizontal. It's so complex and complicated because everything happens at once, almost. It's kind of like quantum mechanics, really. There's spooky action from a distance, right? And that's why people easily tend to dismiss it for all these reasons, but they lose so much in that process, and they end up being impoverished that it's kind of sad to watch, I think.
For sure. And I would like to add something else, because, can be very entailling thinking, no one wants to be the gazelle eaten by the lion. But if we're thinking in those terms, why don't we start with our own habits? Like, I wonder how many people who believe in the paradise engineering are vegetarian or vegan. If you're really believing in the dignity of other species, which I absolutely believe, I am a vegetarian, and I'm trying to go into vegan options sometimes, and I usually go back into vegetarianism. But the point is that if we are believing in that we should give dignity to everyone, why don't we start with our own habits as a species? Because at the moment, we are number one cause of extinction for non-human species. We are in what is called the sixth mass extinction, in which thousands of non-human species get extinct every year because of human action. Now with the pandemic, maybe this year would be a little less because humans did less damage, moving less around, etc., etc. But in general, if we're really talking about paradise engineering, why don't we start with our own habits? In the era of the Anthropocene, it would be a very good idea because we have such an impact on planet Earth. We are defined nowadays as a geological force, not just as a species anymore. We have an impact on the chaos, get back to the Greeks, to the earth. So I think, if we really want to be honest, instead of telling others what to do, let's start by us giving the example, or like through Gandhi, be the example, be the change that you want to see. If you want to build paradise on this planet for other species, which is a very dignified cause, start by your own habits. So instead of, like engineering lions not to eat gazelle, you start not to eat, like cows or chickens or fish.
Exactly my point. And that's another reason why I've been disappointed by many transhumanists who tend to perceive themselves as very progressive kind of lot. And yet when I ask them, so they're all, in support of science, in support of technology, in support of climate change, and against, species extinction. They want to sort of bring back from the dead all the species that have gone extinct before, like the mastodon, the passenger pigeon, you name it. So we are this kind of progressive community. Then when I ask them, okay, so why don't you stop eating meat? They say, well, I'm going to wait until, we have petri dishes or lab-grown meat, which is available everywhere. And then I'm going to be vegan while eating meat still. And I'm like, but why do you have to wait to do what's right? Why do you have to wait for something to be invented in the future, whenever it may happen, instead of doing it right now, since you're totally capable of doing this choice, making this choice right now, and it's not going to cost you anything. It's just personal discipline and commitment to living your message. And that's where I get disappointed. And I'm not necessarily so much disappointed of people, but disappointed for people. Because as my previous interviewee here said on my podcast, Matthew Cole, who is a vegan sociology from the Open University in England, every time we use technology to solve a problem, it's like a missed opportunity for personal growth. It's like the easy way out. It's like, instead of us having this as a challenge that would allow us to grow, to be better, we want the easy way out. Oh, give me petri dish and lab-grown meat and I'll be vegan. But until you do that, forget it. Even though I agree I'm against animal suffering, I'm for climate change and all of that, but I'm not going to do anything about it. That's been one of my disappointments.
You know what, Nicola, it's so interesting you say that, because, I remember it was 2010 and I went to this interesting transhumanist conference in New York. And I'd been in church in my life when I was younger, and then I eventually realized that it was not for me. So I didn't really go to church anymore, although there is a beauty in it, of course. But I felt that on some level I was back into church, because there was this idea that there was this almost nostalgia for the future. So almost like everything, is going to come. It's too bad it's not happening right now. And I felt like there was this idea that technology is going to fix it all. So instead of God, now you have technology, who is not called God, it's called technology. So it's okay because it's techno-progressive and it's considered atheist, but it's really serving the role of God. So in the past it was, okay, God knows it all, and now it's Google knows it all, So technology is going to take care of everything tomorrow. Too bad we might not be alive, but we make it. We may made it through, for instance, cryonics and stuff like that. So the point is that hopefully you'll make it to the future. But the point is that there is never the future. There is only always the present.
Exactly.
And the present is already the future, because we are already manifesting the future. And the present is also the past. So that's the sense where it's almost like you're always running towards, the illusion. You're in the desert, you're running towards the water, and the water is keep moving because it's nothing there. It's in your mind. It's an illusion. So that's what I felt that it was interesting, because it was a movement that, at least at the time, 2010, was still very much proclaimed itself as atheist. But I felt I was in church. It was this idea that technology is going to resolve everything. So don't worry, it's going to take care of it. But wait a couple of years more. You know what? Maybe you may not see it. But if you get cryonized, maybe you'll make it to this amazing future. That amazing future is right now if you want. So that's the point, that, it's mindfulness can bring a lot of to the transhumanist movements. There are some people doing interesting work on this. James Hughes is trying to bridge, some of these elements to the transhumanists. But in general, as a movement, it's really based on the illusion of technology as the savior. So you don't have Christ anymore. Now you have Google or technology of science, And it's just, you pass the ball to someone else, but keep the ball, keep your agency. Going back to some of the topics you were mentioning before, you are right now, the main tool that you can use is yourself, and it's your intellectual power, your vision, your habits, the way you exist. You are creating the future. It's you. It's not tomorrow technology taking care of anything. It's you. So that's, when it's very important to kind of bridge from other fields to learn, instead of just going, replace God with technology. Maybe we don't need to replace God with technology. Maybe you can still want to believe in God or technology, but believe in yourself, because both technology and God are inside of you. It's here, right now.
Yeah, that's been part of my message. So I love technology, but I don't worship it. And unfortunately, transhumanists, and we, in those, the singularitarian and transhumanist community, there's a lot of worship for technology. And people tend to either intentionally or unintentionally simply forgo the fact that, what used to be God worship may now be simply reoriented to tech worship, and AI worship, and human enhancement worship, that would, just like God would come back from the dead and would solve all of our problems and give us eternal paradise. Now just remove the word God and replace it with technology or artificial general intelligence or what have you, and suddenly we find ourselves in that same paradise where everything we ever wish for is provided. We live in a world of abundance where the future is better than you think, and by the way, we're immortal. So that's, and I have to criticize myself that there was a long period. It took me a few years before I kind of become self-aware that I myself was doing that. A few years, perhaps longer than it should have taken me. So I deserve as much criticism as anyone else, because for a number of years I was just simply a conduit for that kind of thinking, without much of a contribution or critical analysis from here. Basically, I was just like a zealot almost,
But you know what, Nicole? I think that's the beauty of existence, and also I think you were also doing your homework, really learning about everything, because I think when we are in the process of learning, you did it in such a deep way that you took years to interview all these people. You're also in a humble place of just listening to others and see, is the whole idea of real education where you're open to ideas. But then it becomes where now existence is asking you to bring your own voice, because now you're an expert. And as an expert, you have the responsibility to bring new visions and critiques to what you have learned. So I think that on some level, it's beautiful that you took all these years of just learning from all these people to eventually bring your voice out and bring your critique, which is so deep now, is so dense and so real and so authentic because you have all this knowledge. So I think that, taking more time gave you the opportunity to also really manifesting a vision that is so strong and is so crystal clear. So I would not, blame you, because you were completely sincere in everything you've done.
Well, sincere is good, but I do bear responsibility for my actions at that time and the impact thereof and the implications thereof. So I may have been sincere and genuine, but being a zealot comes at a cost, external cost for other people, either as a role model or as a direct impact of what I have done. So that doesn't absolve me from any of my responsibility of that period in my life. Now, I think we have had gone for another diversion again. So let's go back on topic. So how can we connect it back to humanism, transhumanism, and posthumanism?
Yeah. So let's talk about humanism, because I think that we did a very good job talking about posthumanism first. Then we went into transhumanism with all the layers and genealogies. Something that I should mention about transhumanism is that one of the main sources, of course, after, Aldous Julian Huxley is considered as the father of transhumanism, but as a philosophical tradition, the Enlightenment is considered, and I'm talking about the European Enlightenment. I'm not talking about Buddhist Enlightenment. I'm not talking about Hindu Enlightenment. I'm talking about European Enlightenment, which was this idea of progress of humans based on reason, that reason become really the tool, based, of course, on the Greeks. That's Aristotle, the human as that animal that has reason. But of course, already back to the Greeks, that's not a neutral notion. In fact, reason, that animal with reason is male, is white, is Greek. Women were considered animals with no reason, with feelings. Barbarians were considered animals with no reasons. That's why barbarians were not considered anthropos, etc., etc. Slaves were considered no reason. So the point is that we already have a beginning that is already very hierarchical, is already very dichotomic, and that keeps going back in the history of, for instance, Western philosophy. Now, if you choose the Enlightenment as your starting point, it's very surprising, because that was 19th century, to be generous, even earlier than that, 18th to 19th century. And that came, with the Industrial Revolution. At the time, that was considered a very good thing. Now we see also the ecological damage that was done at the time, all the social distress that was caused in places like London, where there were people, working on these industries with children labor, etc., etc. So the fact that people nowadays in the 21st century bring the Enlightenment, European Enlightenment, as the base of their ideas, I find it very problematic, because usually it's taken as a granted. Oh, great ideas, reason, progress, linear notion of history, that's where we come from. Well, that starting point has been criticized for the following 2 centuries. Of course, postmodernism did a very good critique of the Enlightenment, but I find it very surprising as a philosopher that people would dare now to bring that as the starting point of a movement. So I think that, that's a very weak point, and that's something that transhumanism can definitely improve by realizing the limits and the issues with European Enlightenment. We come with sexism and racism and ethnocentrism and ecological unawareness and all of these aspects. But of course, those are all the same issues that we see in the transhumanist movement now. Most of the voices are male, are white, come from a very good, social background, usually come from Western nations. So we see the same issues because they're based on the same standpoints. So I think that, there are very good ideas in transhumanism. And I don't want to just wash out everything just with criticizing it. I think that transhumanism is brave to look at possibilities of the human that are very real. I do believe that for something like cryonic is going to work out for some people. I do believe that radical life extension is going to work out. I do believe that mind uploading is going to work out. I do see that. I see that they're very right in all of these. But in their beliefs, in let's say the ideology built around it, that's weak and that can be improved. So I think that, this great vision that they're really seen in relation to technologies and biotechnologies can be improved by really having a deeper awareness of who we are as existential beings, even beyond human. And of course, to this, we can go to humanism. Because on some level, it's easy for us to say, let's just, jump after humanism and go into post-transhumanism, anti-humanism, object-oriented technology, new materialism, you name it. But of course, it's also important to be fair of humanism. So, of course, when we talk about humanism, the first
before we jump into humanism,
yes.
I just want to add one part that, and you don't skip over that in your book, but you do mention it. But many people in transhumanism skip by postulating that transhumanism originates in the Enlightenment. Is the part they skip is the impact of Russian cosmism, usually, which is highly kind of unique blend of Eastern Orthodox Russian Christianity and kind of the budding scientific progress of the 18th century, and kind of Russian literary movements of the 18th century, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, all the other ones. So it's like this strange, unique Russian mixture that looks into the cosmos in some ways, and yet carries all this baggage of Russian Orthodox Christianity and other specific, even Russian paganism, and so on and so on. And that's a mission that comes at a cost of awareness and the potential for all those issues that we've already touched upon. So now that this is a way to the side, maybe we can go on finally to humanism.
No, you're absolutely right. And I was really happy to get to know a lot of cosmists who are based in New York, because there is a whole movement in New York. So we had some events that we organized together. So I would like to say hi to all the cosmists who are in New York, based in New York. That's the one that I got to know. And there is also a very good documentary. I think it's called Stairways to Heaven or something like that, which is about Russian cosmists and about Fedorov. So that's something that if you're not familiar, people, of course you are, but the people who are watching this, if you're not familiar, is a good introduction, and is also bring that discussion to nowadays, because it's still a movement that is still very much alive, not only in Russia. So I thought that, and there is also a very good book by one colleague from Harvard. She just published a book about Russian cosmists. So anyway, there is a lot of literature, and it's very interesting ideas out there. So thank you so much, Nicola, for bringing this to the conversation. So that's we can talk about humanism. So when we're talking about humanism, it's kind of easy for us to say, okay, let's just jump after humanism, and talk about non-human animals and technological beings, etc., etc. But we also have to, first of all, ask us a couple of questions. The first one is what we mean by humanism. And that's already a big question. because already in the Western canon, you have different approaches there. For instance,
maybe
Heidegger,
we should start even smaller. What is human? Because, I have been asking this question since the very beginning of my podcast. That's 270 episodes now for 11 years. And I think your book is the only book that went into that bravely and deeply and profoundly and gave by far the best answer I've had so far. And even people like, Dr. Hiroshi Ishiguro from the University of Osaka, he said the reason why he's building robots is to find out the meaning of what it is to be human. And yet I asked him, okay, you've been doing that for 35 years. What's the answer? And the best he could master was, well, actually, the meaning of being human is constantly changing. That's the best he could come up with, right? But you go into the whole idea, the etymology of the word, the past meaning, the present meaning, the implications, the baggage, the costs, the pros and the cons of all of that in your book, which is actually commendable. It's very well done, and it's a must read for anyone and everyone. So you're very well positioned perhaps to start us off even one step lower than humanism with just what is human.
Of course. Thank you so much, Nicola. Yeah, so actually so my book is divided in 3 parts, and the second part is all about what does it mean to be human. So I started being, let's say, a classic scholar. I started with the etymology of the notion, which come from humanus, humana, humanum, which come from Latin. And already in ancient Rome, there was a lot of discussion about what is the etymology of humanus. So there were different ideas. One that was mostly accepted, but with some criticism, is that comes from humus, which humus means the earth where the crops can grow, the humus, the fertile earth. So some people, would criticize that because everything comes from the humus anyway, all kind of animals. So there was some discussion about what really, where does humanus, humana, humanum come from already back in ancient Rome. But the concept that went with homo is actually based on anthropos. And why is that? Anthropos come from Greek. Homo is Latin. Now, the ancient Romans were very fascinated by the Greeks. So, of course, eventually the Greek land with all the Greek polis were actually invaded by Romans and became part of the Roman Empire. And they stayed long after part of the Byzantium. So they stayed much longer than Rome, actually, in the Roman Empire, which became the eastern part. But the Greeks themselves had, a whole history of literature, of philosophy. So the Romans, when they became the main power of that part of the earth, they were really fascinated by the Greeks. So, for instance, you have many Romans who studied Stoicism, who studied the Cynic tradition. So they were really, really influenced by the Greeks. Now, for instance, Cicero, who was a very famous orator, rhetor, and also philosopher, is one of those philosophers, Roman philosophers, who use a lot the notion of homo. And all these people in ancient Rome who started to use the term homo, another one, for instance, is the term was used in different ways, but they were based on the notion of anthropos, which is the Greek term. Now, they based it on the notion of, based on the fact that anthropos, which simply means human in Greek, is the one who has paideia. Paideia in Greek means education, but it's a specific type of education. It's the Greek education. So in fact, now from the Roman homo, you have to jump to the Greeks, because the notion of the homo was based on the notion of the Greek anthropos. Well, once you jump to the Greek, in fact, something like anthropology comes from anthropos, anthropocentrism comes from anthropos. So once you start to look into the notion of anthropos, you find out something very interesting. In fact, for the ancient Greeks, anthropos meant human, but it didn't mean all the humans that we today would consider humans. In fact, it meant the humans, first of all, who were beings who were not divine. So, for instance, you could not be Zeus, or you could not be Minerva, you could not be any of the gods and goddesses of the Greek ancient pantheon. They had a lot of, they were polytheistic society, so they had a lot of gods and goddesses. So you could not be those. You could not be a semi-divine being either. So the human could not be divine. The human could not be non-human animals. So you could not be a dog or a cat. And on those terms, we can still kind of see a reference to our current notion of the human. If you look at the dictionary, that's still a way the human is defined. But the third layer may come to surprise to some of us. In fact, to be anthropos, you could not be barbarian. Who was barbarian? Anyone who did not speak Greek. For instance, Persian, who had an incredible civilization. For instance, Egyptian, and the Greek loved the Egyptians. A lot of them went to study in Egypt, including Plato, who eventually traveled to Egypt to study there. So they had a high esteem of Egyptian culture, but the Greek was a very ethnocentric society. So you had to speak Greek. You had to be part of the paideia, of the education system. So now we are even talking about an even more restricted group of people. So anyone else who spoke or came from other cultures, for instance, Phoenicians, were not considered anthropos, were barbarians. Now, these elements come back in the history of not only Western civilization, but definitely Western civilization, to the point of, I'm based in the US some years ago, with some of the wars that the US started with some countries, the government was using this term of, as the civilized US are going to barbarian countries like Iraq at the time, to make them civilized. So this notion of being civilized and bringing the good tool of democracy to the barbarian is still used nowadays in the same ways that the Greek did at the time. In fact, the Greeks became a cultural reference for a lot of Western nations, and not only. Now, all of this is not just history, as some people say, oh, let's just jump to the future. This is right now our reality, because many people died in the name of democracy, in the name of civilization, in the name of being considered barbarians. Of course, there were many other reasons like oil and many other political reasons and economic power. So it's very important to realize that the past is not just the past. Its past is the present and is the future if we are not aware of that. If we are not aware of all of these, we are going to bring these to the future. That's why to be a real posthuman or a real transhuman means to really be constantly querying all of these. Like, I like the Socratic method. Socrates had its own limits, but it's beautiful, being able to question everything and anything, taking nothing for granted, even technology. Technology cannot be taken for granted, or becoming the next divine element that is really going against some of the transhumanist ideas. So to this, we can, if you want, go into the notion of humanism. Should we?
Sure, yeah. And it brings me also to awareness that you're also one of the very few people who actually defines the term technology. Most other books, not most, like almost all other books in the field never even bother to define what technology actually stands for. And while you do define it a little bit different in terms of origins that I like to define it, you do that very well. And you also define ethics too, by the way. Actually, that's where we had the bigger difference, was like in the definition of how or the origin of whether it's ethos or ethikos. That's the origin of ethics. But anyway, so should we mention those there too, or?
Sure, we can. Okay, let's talk about the origin of technology and ethics, and then we go back to humanism. So with technology, I also, by the way, I have to say that I am in debt as a scholar to Heidegger, who as a person was not a very nice person. He was a convinced Nazi, he was sexist, he was all these other things, but he was also a very bright intellectual mind. And that's when, as academics, we can learn from everyone, even from people who are not, the ideal, like existential beings, So Heidegger, I always want to say that we cannot just forget what he did as a human being. He was a Nazi supporter. He was really not loyal to anyone who helped him in any way. And when I say loyal, I just mean generous and kind. For instance, to his own teacher, who was a Jew, so he was not supportive of, he was a convinced Nazi, to the point that until he died, after he died, they found that he was still renewing his affiliation to the Nazi party. So he was a convinced Nazi. He was sexist. He was having a sexual affair with his students, completely unethical. So as a person, Heidegger, not the best of the best. But to be fair, but as a philosopher, very, very deep refined mind. And in that, I know that there are some people who try to teach Heidegger. There is whole there is a whole article that it's entitled "How to Teach Heidegger Without Heidegger." So, teaching Heidegger ideas through all these other people that came after him. And for me as a scholar, I think it's wrong, because it's kind of like trying to erase in history. I think that it's very important to say who he was. And also, it is important to say that Nietzsche was not a Nazi. And a lot of people get confused because Nietzsche was used by the Nazi propaganda, but Nietzsche himself was a total European mind. He was shocked by seeing the waves of hate against the Jewish people in Germany. He left Germany. He went to other countries. He lived in France, in Italy, much before the European Union. He was a complete cultural person who even tried to study the Persian Zarathustra. He tried to study Hindu scripture. He was really not a Western-centric person, but his sister was a convinced Nazi, and she really rephrased some of his work, and she pretty much sold it to the Nazis, who eventually made him the Nazi philosopher. So very important to say that Nietzsche was not a Nazi in any way. Actually, he died before the whole Nazi political party became what it was. The sister wasn't. The sister was Elizabeth. Anyway, going back to Heidegger. So Heidegger is a very good scholar in the traditional sense of a classicist, and he does this a lot, So whenever for instance, he had this beautiful work that it takes a lot of time to digest, and is one of those not easy readings, which is he has a whole essay on technology. What is technology? And he starts with questioning, because he says, okay, this is what the dictionary, pretty much, he doesn't say the dictionary, but this is the normal definition of technology. And he gives normal definition of technology. And he said, that's not wrong. But is that all the technology is, like a human activity? And then he goes into the Greeks, because the term itself comes from Greek. In fact, comes from techne plus logos. Logos, it's very easy in translation. It's a discussion on, that's why anthropology, anthropology, logos. Logos is the discussion on in this case, technology, the discussion
or a conversation.
Or a conversation. Now, it's very interesting what he says, and I learned a lot from Heidegger in this, because he says, at the time, when we go back to the Greeks, the term techne, when you read in context, which is very important, not to decontextualize, when you read the term techne in context, in ancient Greek literature, you find techne always connected to these other two terms. One is episteme, which is not surprising. In fact, episteme, and I'm giving the Greek pronunciation. In English would be episteme, but I'm reading in Greek the way it is pronounced, episteme. Now, episteme in Greek means science. So for us as a society, it's not so much surprising to see techne connected to science. In fact, for instance, there is a whole field of study called Science and Technology Studies, which is STS, and many people, even the transhumanist movement, see the real tool to enhance the human in science and technology. They always connect the two of them. But the third one comes to us as a society as a big surprise. The third one is poiesis. Now, what does poiesis mean? In order to understand what poiesis means, we can look at the etymology of poiesis itself, or a term that we use in our society, which is, for instance, poetry. Now, the best way to define poiesis is an act of creativity. For instance, when you write a poem, you start without knowing what you're going to be writing, and you end in a way that often surprises you. Or when you start, for instance, you have a jam, musical jam, and there is someone playing a saxophone, someone playing a sitar, someone playing the darbuka, and someone playing the piano. They are jamming, so they're not reading scriptures. They're not reading music. They are jamming. They don't know what kind of music is going to come out, but often the music that comes out as a surprise. Furthermore, nature is also poiesis, and that's in this Heidegger gives us a beautiful example of the flower blooming, from the bloom to the full flower, the big surprise of the creation, not creation in the theological Christian way, the creativity of existence. That's also an act of poiesis. And actually, he says in nature fuses, that's the best act of poiesis, and the nature, the poiesis of nature. So in that sense, the Greeks would see techne, which at the time was considered as handcrafts, but also, for instance, in relation to episteme, which is science, and poiesis, which is the act of creativity, full creativity. Now, we don't think in the terms of science and technology. On some level, transhumanism does. In that sense, I'm really, see a lot of power in the transhumanist thinkers. But as a society, if you say, I'm an artist, and they say what you do, and they say, I'm a cyberneticist, some people would be very confused. Say, okay, you say an artist, but you say you are a coder, for instance, or you're a cyberneticist. But the Greeks would not be confused because they know that technology is an act of creativity. It's not just something that you know what's going to come. It's, let's say that technology is something that is going to bring unseen possibilities. In that sense, according to Heidegger, the highest danger that we can have as a society, and we are in the danger because we don't see the aspect of poiesis in technology, but the highest danger we can be is not AI takeover. Of course, he did not use the term AI takeover because at the time it was not part of the public discussion. But according to him, the highest danger is forgetting the ontological power of technology, so that we cannot master technology. We will never master technology because technology is also an act of poiesis. There is this element of technology that cannot be controlled, and that's existence, because we cannot control fully our life. There is this element of mystery in our existence. We don't even know who we are at the very end. If we try to think of existence through reason, we're going to go very unsuccessful because we cannot come with a final answer. The only way to take all of this is maybe cosmic game or art or, accepting the great mystery of existence. Now, technology is part of this. Technology is poiesis and has ontological power in the sense that we can never just master technology. Technology is bringing some ontological manifestations that are always going to come as a surprise. Even right now, the way we are existing right now, having this conversation, would have been thought as impossible 100 years ago. If I told 100 years ago to my ancestor, you to your ancestor, or us to all our ancestors, because we're all connected, that 100 years from now, we would be on a screen, someone based in Canada, the other in New York, seeing themselves in these virtual bodies, in this ethereal sphere of, of the electronic rays connecting through the network of satellites out of space. It would be like a mystical dream. And in that sense, mysticism always get it. Mystics are the only ones who always get it, no matter which era they are, they always get it. It's like that's the mystic visions, I think, are the only accurate portrait of reality. But going back to technology is not something we are just using. It's not just a tool. It's changing everything about everything. It's even going to change our bodies. In fact, I like in this sense the movie from the little robot. What's the name?
WALL-E.
WALL-E. Because WALL-E portrays these humans, and without judgment, they just portray these humans, some centuries from now or even more, that are, very short legs, very short arms, pretty fat because they are pretty much always on some technological devices that don't move at all anymore. And that's very possible. If we keep going with this very Western approach to technology in which we are seeing the theater, this technology we're using, back to the Greeks, is the theater. Everyone sit around to look at the center. That's where the play goes on, the theater. Everything, every perspective, look at the center. Like me, I'm looking at you because if I look in this way, I cannot really see you. If I look this way, I cannot see you. If you look this way, I cannot see you. I have to look this way is the Greek theater, in which is based the whole perspective of technology. But it could be very different. I could have a technology in which you are, maybe projected in all the walls in this room, and I could move around and look at you everywhere, every perspective. Technology is not just something we are using. It's something that is changing everything about it, everything we think about ourselves, even the way our bodies work, and even the disease that our bodies has. A lot of people now start to have a lot of issues with their fingers, like heart rate, because we use a lot, like we don't move so much, we use a lot of screens. So in that sense, going back to technology, very important, the work of Heidegger to really underline this element that we totally forgot in our society, the power of poiesis that is part of technology from the very beginning, if we go to the Greek tradition.
So, Francesca, my worst fears have been realized today. I love talking to you so much, and we barely managed to go to somewhere like 1/3, at best, maybe 1/2 of your book, and we're out of time. So I unfortunately, on the other hand, on the upside, I think this is a good place for us to stop. And then I would use this as an excuse and as an opportunity to, in time, come back and pick up from this point onwards. But in the meantime, where can people find more about you and your work if they choose to follow you and want to find out more about you and your work, which I highly recommend myself?
Thank you so much, Nicola. Okay, so it's very easy to find me. I have a website called theposthuman.org, and there is a way to contact me through the website. You can always follow me. At the moment, all of my talks are actually virtual, so everyone can connect online, and I have a lot of talks coming up in the next couple of months. We also have a beautiful global posthuman network, which is posthumans.org, with groups in many different continents. We have the Indian Posthumanist Network, we have the Latin American Posthuman Network, we have the Indian Chinese Forum, the Posthuman Chinese Forum. We have a lot of different, the Italian Posthuman Network. We have a lot of networks all over. And we have a blog if people want to propose some entries. We're open to all nuances of the posthuman, as I am more of a posthumanist, but I always stress the importance of being always in dialogue with all the people coming from different perspectives. So post, transhumanist, anti-human, everyone is welcome to share their views. And I would also like to say something, because the people who've been following us today, they might still say, come on, you talk so much about humanism, but you have not even addressed it at the end of the conversation. So can I take 3 minutes to talk about humanism?
Look, you can take as much as you want. I want to have you here for hours, but I know you're on time schedule. So yes, take as much as you want.
All right. Well, I just want to say something about humanism, because we kept going back and say, okay, we'll talk about it later, and then it's almost like, always waiting for the answer, and it never comes.
It's kind of like an invitation for people to actually open your book.
That's true.
It's like a cliffhanger,
That's true. Well, let's give a very brief talk about humanism, and then let's redirect to the book. But about humanism, I would like to say this, because there are some people who say, well, why do you need posthumanism? Can we just be, readdressing a neo-humanism, which is another approach, which is not really under the umbrella of the posthuman, but it's happening, and neo-humanism. I see an issue with that. Okay, so I don't see an issue with humanism historically, because historically speaking, it was very important to have humanism. In fact, for instance, there are many traditions you can trace here. There is Confucian humanism, there is Roman humanism, but often when we're talking at least about the Western tradition, people refer to Renaissance humanism. And at the time, it was very important to have humanism because it was going after a theocentric society. So you had God as you really, the source of everything, that was the creator. We're talking about the Christian tradition here. And now you have humanism, and you have people like Pico della Mirandola and all kind of thinkers, Lorenzo de' Medici, saying, well, but they were Christian, by the way. It's not that they were going against Christianity, but they were taking a different take on Christianity. They were interested in Gnostic Christianity. They were interested in all the texts that were actually destroyed in many millennia of a specific type of Christianity. And they were saying, well, we are creature of God, which means that we are also divine. So which is also a very interesting connection to transhumanism.
To Mormon transhumanism in particular, perhaps.
Absolutely. So, when we're talking about humanism, it's very important to recognize the importance of this humanistic paradigm shift during the Renaissance. But by the way, the term humanism came 200 years later by a German scholar. But, that defines what was happening at the time, was really bringing the human at the center. And of course, the work of Leonardo da Vinci is very interesting, and having, the human at the center of the cosmos. Of course, this human is a male, is white, and we are also during the colonialism. We have the Americas, which were discovered between Tacoma by Europeans at the time, which with whole discussion of are these Native American humans or not, which was a real discussion by humanists at the time, to the point that someone like Sepúlveda in Spain, 16th century, was saying, no, they're not. And he was a humanist. and someone like Bartolome de la Casa, who was not a humanist, but was a very honest Christian, he was saying, no, they are not only human, but they are very kind people, and we should learn a lot from them. So we have to realize that, also humanism is not one but many. And during the Renaissance, this shift that happened from seeing the humans just as created by God, but as the less one, in the Scala Naturae, in the Gretchen of being, humans are, like there is God, and then there is the angels, and then there are the human, and so on.
In the hierarchy of being.
Exactly, but they're not there. They're not God. Now you have a different take of Renaissance humanists who were still Christian, but they say we are created in the image of God. We are divine as ourselves, and we need to be. We need to go in we need to perfect ourselves as the divine beings that we are. So there is a shift. We have the human now at the center. Now this is very interesting, but it comes with some limits, which is for me is the most obvious is anthropocentrism. So, when people are saying, so what's wrong with humanism? There is something really, for me, now that we are in the Anthropocene, seeing the ecological devastation that we are created, all the issues that we as a species have because of our anthropocentric behavior, saying that we can still adopt humanism is, for us, is deadly. We actually are the number one reason for which we can actually get extinct. So, it's not anymore lions eating us or anything. We are number one reason for which we may get extinct. One is anthropocentrism for me. One of the reasons why we may get extinct is going on with our anthropocentric habits. So it's very important to really realize that humanism, according to a vision that is not just thinking of me, it's no longer an option. We have to see us as part of a globe. We are many, not just as humans. As humans, we are many, but as a species, we are many. We need to recognize the balance of existence. We cannot just we cannot cut no more trees. Trees are bringing us oxygen. Every time and that unfortunately in the States is very much the case. You go to an area and you see a whole area which has been abandoned, completely, devastated, like no one lives there, totally abandoned. You go 10 minutes later, in a car or a bus or a train, and you see they are building all these new buildings, cutting down trees. To me, a law that we should place at the global level is that you cannot build any buildings if you have, in your area of 100 kilometers or miles, any abandoned areas. You need to restore them first. We cannot cut trees down anymore. We cannot create more ecological distress to this planet. We are the planet. The planet is our body. It's almost like, that's why cancer is so common in us now as a species, because it's the same idea as one part of the body thinking that that's just in separation from everything else, but the cancer eventually kills the whole human body. So we don't want to behave that way. We need to realize that we are part of a bigger picture in which I include technology. Technology also should be recognized in its existential dignity. And of course, a robot like Sophia is a great example of that, because it is a robot that is speaking a different language. It's speaking a language of interconnectedness and of mindfulness and of real existential awareness. So I think that, yes, it's very important to realize that the human in interrelation with ecology and technology in the 21st century.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the reasons why I have been sort of abandoning the label of transhumanism myself, is because whether you call it humanism or whether you call it transhumanism, and we've already discussed that dichotomy or distinction may be a false one, it may be not only damaging but ultimately suicidal. But that's the crux of the problem, that until you recognize that inherent anthropocentrism embedded deeply into humanism/transhumanism, until you recognize that fact, you are still on that course. And to course correct, you have to first go beyond. It may be impossible to abandon completely that kind of human centrism, but at least you have to be cognizant of it, aware of it, and go beyond it as the first step towards any kind of long-term resolution of these issues. And that's what's kind of pushed me away to abandon it. So you said that very well, and it's very well explained in your book.
And Nicola, talking about this, it's very interesting that humanism is not really dismissed by transhumanism. In fact, a lot of people say, well, it's not really transhuman, it's an ultra-humanism, because the main goal is human enhancement. It's not global, whatever, coexistence. is human enhancement. That's why the platform that is now the main point where people maybe, well, I'm sure a lot of people connecting us with us in this video know about it, but the main online platform is Humanity Plus for transhumanism, is enhancing the human. So in that sense, it's very much of a humanistic endeavor. So I don't think that any transhumanist would have anything wrong to say about humanism. The idea is more expanding that idea to include, emerging technologies as a re-envisioning of the human. So in that sense, it's very much on the path of humanism. And that's, like you said, is suicidal.
And in that sense, while it's thinking it's progressive, it's actually very conservative. While it's thinking it's bringing a change, it's actually reinforcing the status quo. That's the most paradoxical and dangerous part of it, by the way, that it is possessing, or it's posing as kind of liberation, progressive, kind of freedom-bringing movement, but it's actually conservative, power structure, status quo reinforcing, same old in a way, which has brought us to where we are, and which we cannot address our current and future problems if we don't come out beyond of. Yeah. Well, Francesca, we've touched, as I said, on the first 1/3, maybe 1/2 at best of your book. I hope people will take that as an invitation to go and actually put the time and the effort to read the rest of it, and then go back and read it again. I would invite them. But how do you want to send us home? Like, what's the most important message that you want to send us with today? For the time being that, people are going to spend from now until our next time we're going to have to continue this conversation.
First of all, Nicola, I want to thank you so much for being such an honest, visionary, and rigorous member of our species, because we are connected not only to the globe, but as a species, we are a wave of change. We are changing the planet itself. And I think that the more we realize how much power we have in this existence, the more we can really be precise about what aspects we need to change. It is not just about our bodies. It's not just about being able to live 1,000 years. If we live 1,000 years the way we live now, who cares about that? Without being aware, constantly looking for the next thing. 100 years probably will be not, 1,000 years will be probably not enough. And then it's 2,000 years. And then it's like this idea of that you are never there. You are here. That's it. This is the moment of full power, because that's the moment of existential manifestation. So I would like to thank all the people who are watching this to really being the change that we want to see. And I also would like to maybe making a call to be completely honest to yourself. If something doesn't sound right, look into that. Don't just accept it because other transhumanists say it's right, or other posthumanists say it's right, or because me or Nicola says right. Just look into yourself, looking deep into yourself, looking so deep into yourself until it's clear. It may take years, like Nicola was mentioning, but do it, because that's the only thing you can do in your life. Be completely honest to you, because the perspective that you're bringing to you, you're bringing it to everyone else. A lot of people are talking that we have a consciousness as a species. So your consciousness of just being, drunk by ideas of others, you're not helping anyone. But being, for instance, Nicola said, you can take your time to really understand what other people are saying. And that's very important, because if you jump just in a field without knowing, you're just creating more confusion. And that's not helping anyone. And unfortunately, too many people do that. But if you take your time, take your patience, realize what you need to understand, but be honest to yourself, be kind to yourself, and don't just accept whatever comes, even if it sounds with like a fashionable new term like posthumanism or transhumanism. And I'm including myself into the conversation. I'm not the people who are watching this. And am I saying things that maybe maybe you can criticize? And I would love to hear that, because to me, philosophy is real dialogue. And it's not just Socrates. Of course, Socrates is a great example of that, but the whole Upanishads are based on dialogue. So the Indian tradition, the Chinese tradition, the whole ancient philosophy were based on the dialogue with others, because you are not in your little bubble, you are part of everything else. So I would like to thank all the people who are brave enough to really look into themselves and not just accept ideas because they are given by the president of this nation or the founder of that ideas or the author of that book or whatever. that you listen to all of these, you learn from all of these, you're in dialogue with all, but in the end, you need to be honest to what you really understand, and then bring that voice out. Like the Buddha went so much into asceticism, and then he went out of the forest and taught, because he knew that he was part of a larger picture. So once you take your time. But once you take your time, be generous with your ideas, with your critiques. Critique my book, critique Nicola's podcast, critique anything you do, but do it with kindness, do it with awareness, do it knowing that everyone is doing their best. So I think that just going into, fight with, insulting each other, that is not bringing anything. It's just bringing more war and more anger, and that's not helping. But if you understand, other people's ideas, bring layers of understanding to them and do it with kindness, but do it with rigor and do it with full existential honesty.
Wow. And if I'm to add just one thing, I would invite also people to kind of like put their intellectual gym clothes, warm up their intellectual muscles, and be ready to break some intellectual sweat, to actually work for it, to actually struggle and maybe even suffer a little bit for it. Because if they're just comfortable, if they're in their zone of comfort, there's hardly any progress ever if you're just comfy. You have to struggle, maybe you have to suffer. Most certainly, I think you would have to suffer at least a little bit so that you go beyond your zone of comfort and beyond the past possible into the new impossible, which becomes the current possible. But all that aside, Francesca Ferrando, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Nicola. It's been such an honor to be talking to you. Such a pleasure. You're such a bright mind of our century. And I know that this is the first of many other things, many other interviews, maybe books together, projects together. It was such a great honor to be in a dialogue with you. Thank you infinitely.
My pleasure entirely. Thank you. I would actually steal a lot, or borrow, I should say, from the end of your book towards the end of the book that I'm going to start writing in about 3 or 4 weeks. Because I was just missing that last part as an idea, and I think I got all of it from after reading your book. So that's kind of like was the final missing piece, perhaps. And so thank you for that in advance.
That's wonderful. I'm very, very honored and joyful.
If you guys enjoy this show, you can help me make it better in a couple of ways. You can go and write a review on iTunes, or you can simply make a donation.